Good evening all, and welcome. A final resting place for many, cemeteries and graveyards are where our loved ones may go when their life is over. But just because their physical body has reached its end, doesn't mean that they don't stick around in other ways. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Back when I was in high school, my friend and I saw something, and I began referring to it as a crawler. This was in Rossville, Illinois, nighttime and in a cemetery. I think it was probably late summer or early fall, because I don't remember it being too cold out. It would have been between 2007 and 2010, and I'm pretty sure the moon was full or close to it, because the visibility was pretty good. My friend and I used to walk this loop. We would leave her place and go down a block to a side road that led to a park. We would then turn left and cut across the park to the side entrance of the cemetery. The cemetery and park sat at the very southwest corner of town. Beyond that was just woods and cornfields. If we went straight across the cemetery, it would take us to another side road that then led to the main street, back to where her house was. We made it to the cemetery and were walking the main drive that split the property in half. There was a sudden noise that made both of us stop. My friend started laughing nervously and asked if I had heard the noise. I told her I had seen what had made the noise. To our left, I had seen something running behind the headstones. It was on all fours, but humanoid. It had extremely pale skin and no hair, and looked very thin. I remember it was so pale, it almost reflected the moonlight. It moved so fast. Too fast for any human I've seen on their hands and feet, that I couldn't see many details. It was in total profile, so I never saw the facial details. The way it ran was animal-like, as well in that it had gait where its feet came forward, almost between or past its hands. If you watch a video of a big cat or wild dog running, you'll see what I mean. We were both terrified. We just stood there panicking and listening to it move around. Just out of sight, while we called one of her friends to come and meet us and take us the rest of the way home. Her friend, a very typical high school boy, arrived and naturally wanted to stay in the cemetery for a while and goof off. For some reason with him there acting dumb, it was less scary, but I just remember that it kept making these wide circles around us. It always stayed out of sight, but you could hear it as it moved. Occasionally it would come in a bit closer, then dart further away again. Eventually we left. I spent a while researching it and even reached out to a paranormal group in Champaign for advice. The guy I'd talked to had never heard of it, but wanted to document what we saw. We met up and did an interview with him, but the group never did an investigation. Fast forward a few years, and I'm living in Aurora. I met one of my closest friends in about 2012. We really hit it off because we were into the paranormal. When I eventually told him about what I had seen, his jaw hit the floor. He told me that he had seen the same thing and told me his story. He described exactly what I had seen, but he had seen it under a porch while living in Thornton. It was crouched down and squatting. He thinks he startled it while it was eating, because he said it was hunched over something it was holding. He comes from a Navajo/Apache background, and when we first met, his best guess was Skinwalker or Wendigo. But then, and especially now, he said he's had doubts about either of those things being the answer. He was dating a girl at the time whose mother claimed to be a medium. She said she thought it was something that someone had woken up, and that it was now angry. We both have serious doubts on that one. The stranger part came when he and I brought it up, both starting having very intense nightmares about it. His were worse than mine and lasted much longer. This was also punctuated by 6 months of bad luck and extreme anxiety for us. I always sort of brushed this off as just psyching ourselves out, until I sent my story into a podcast. After it was read, another listener sent in their story. They described what my friend and I had seen, and also described the sightings as being punctuated by nightmares. I couldn't write that off, because he spoke about his nightmares in detail, and they matched my friend's nightmares exactly. Bear in mind that I had never given out any details of what exactly happened in either of our nightmares. I have read a ton of other stories by other people on the internet. I've dug through mounds of lore and cryptid lists, and I still don't feel like I have an answer to what this thing is. My best guess at this point is that the nightmares aren't coincidental, and that this is something that is interdimensional. It seems like it can interact with physical things around it, but I've never heard anyone tell a first-hand account of being physically attacked or even touched. I've speculated on it for what could be hours, and the only conclusion that I can come to is I don't feel like there's an actual concrete answer. It doesn't act exactly like this or that cryptid, but I think it might be something that's been around and inspired other cryptids or paranormal tales, but I don't think it's a Wendigo, Skinwalker, Ghoul, or Fleshgate. What do you guys think? My father used to work at an airbase. This occurred when I was 6, in the 1st grade. We still lived in base housing at the time. My school bus couldn't drop me off on base at my bus stop, as I was the only kid on board who needed to go on base. I was kicked out of the school for Air Force kids for bad behavior, and this was post 9/11. They would drop me off at the gate, and I would walk to my dad's office, since it wasn't very far and maybe a few blocks away. If you can imagine a little schoolgirl with a Kim Possible bag, French braids, and her favorite stuffed wolf in her arms, that's what I looked like the day this happened. My father had taught me to always stay along the main road when I walked to his office, because then everyone who was driving around would see me. The main road ran straight through the base, passing by the housing, dorms, museums, and the like. But it also passed by the old cemetery, left over from the days that the base was an army fort. The gates were always locked, but the inside was, and still is, well kept, all things considered. Green grass, tall oak trees, fresh flowers on holidays, and wreaths on each headstone every year. There are 60 to 70 headstones there, and the last person buried there was in 1910. I passed by every day, but today was different. A side gate was open. Being a kid, I debated whether or not to take this opportunity to cut through the cemetery to get to my dad's office, or to just go around like normal. I chose to walk through. It was abnormally quiet there. In spring there's always a lot of meadowlarks about, making noise, but it was quiet in the cemetery. save for the sound of passing cars and that wonderful prairie wind ripping through. The shade was nice, so I kept going, taking the chance to practice reading the names and numbers in my head. Out of the corner of the eye, I saw movement, like a black blob. Looking towards it, I could see a woman in a long black dress and veil, kneeling in front of a headstone. In the silence, I could make out the sound of sad prayers and light sobs. So I walked over and stood behind her. "Why are you crying?" I asked. The woman turned to look at me. I couldn't see her eyes behind the veil, but she had tears stained across her cheeks. I was overwhelmed with sadness by just looking at her. "Why are you crying?" I asked again. She said that someone that she loved was gone, and that she cries day and night. "I'm sorry," I thought for a second. "Do you want to hold my Wolfie? He makes me feel better when I'm really sad and when Papa's away. He growls when you squeeze his tummy." Remember, I was 6. And as I said that, I gave Wolfie a hard squeeze, making him growl. She nodded and gently took him from me and gave him a squeeze back. For a brief second, I thought she smiled. She handed him back to me. "Thank you. You should run home before your father begins to worry." She said that as I turned to leave. When I turned back around to ask her how she knew my papa, she was gone. I'd never run so hard in my life. To this day, I wonder if in fact I met the widow in black that security talks about. This is a true story that happened on May 15th, 2006, in a small Illinois town where I grew up. I've always believed in ghosts ever since I was a little girl, because for the first 10 years of my life, my family and I have lived in an old spooky house where many strange things happened that were unexplainable. I never actually saw anything in the house, but on the evening of May 15th, 2006, I encountered a full body apparition. There's an old cemetery that I used to go to, just to walk around and look at the headstones. It's a very quiet, peaceful place, and after having a stressful day, I liked to go there for a bit to relax. I also took my 2 children there when they were younger, because there were gophers that dug holes in the ground, and the kids liked to see them every once in a while. We always felt comfortable there, never afraid. We always went in the daytime and never at night. Not that I was afraid or anything. It just seemed like the daytime was when we went there. Anyway, when I went there to walk around, I usually went by myself. My 2 kids were older at this point, so they had other things to do and lost interest in going. I've always loved this old cemetery, so I continued going there from time to time. I always went in the afternoon, around 2 to 3 p.m. I would walk through it several times and then just head home. On this day, the incident happened. I was running late that day and didn't get to the cemetery until around 4:30. I'd had a stressful day and needed to walk and a little bit of alone time. Even though it was a later time than when I usually went, and would be getting dark soon, it didn't matter. I had been in there many times before, and nothing had ever happened to me, so I didn't give it a second thought. I always parked my car at the very back, and would walk through several times until I got tired. Let me explain something to you. There is only one way out of this cemetery, and that's through the front. This place is pretty big and surrounded by a very high fence with barbed wire on the top, and there's no way over it. The very back has a smaller fence, but there's a sharp drop-off that goes into a riverbed, so no one could leave that way. On this particular day, I parked in the back as usual, and left my vehicle. I had a habit of checking my surroundings before I exited, like looking to see if anyone else were there. I didn't want to get trapped in by some weirdo. I looked around and saw no one, and began my walk. I walked through several times and had stopped to look at a few headstones. After about an hour and a half or so, I stopped at my car to rest. I noticed twilight coming on and debated going home. I thought I'd walk through one more time before heading back. I looked around, no one was there, and began walking again. I was about 2 blocks from my car when I heard what sounded like a male voice yelling, "Hey!" from behind me. I froze because I knew it was impossible for someone to be behind me, in the back of the cemetery, so quickly, without me seeing them? I had just been back there by my car several minutes before. Nobody was there. I turned around and saw what appeared to be a tall, thin man, dressed in a dark blue uniform. It was getting kind of dark back then, and I could still see where he was. When he looked at me, he waved his hand and started walking very fast, eager to catch up. I was afraid. I honestly thought this was some crazy person, and something told me to run, so I did. I ran to my car as fast as I could, got in, and started it up there and then. I decided to drive through to see who the weirdo was, but nobody was there at all. I drove through the entire place twice and didn't see a single soul. I knew that that was no person I saw, but a phantom. I didn't realize this was the case when I saw him. He wasn't transparent or anything like that. He didn't float above the ground, disappear in front of me, or anything. I thought he was just a regular guy. I then knew it was really a ghost when I couldn't find him, as there's no way he could have left that place. It's just impossible. When I saw him, he was in the very back of the cemetery, not too far from where my car was parked. It didn't take me long to get back there, because I doubled back and took a shortcut in between the headstones. I drove through right away, and should have seen him walking on the path still, but he was nowhere. I'd never forgotten this incident, and have never been back to the cemetery. Whether people believe me or not, I don't mind. It happened, and that's all that matters. And if I were you, I'd seriously think about going into a cemetery alone at night. My family often reminisces of living there. A few years ago, over a couple of drinks, my dad started asking me about living at our old house. He used the basement bathroom every morning, as he had a long commute to work and had to be up early, and also because he kept his work clothes in a closet in the basement. This is where it starts getting interesting. My dad recalls on several occasions where he would be in the basement early in the morning in order to get ready for work, and would feel a cold air lurk over him. He said most of the time it didn't alarm him, but on a few occasions he felt the need to speak out loud. "I'm not here to bother you, I'm just getting ready for work." And then he would feel the cold dissipate. After realizing we had similar experiences at the house, we started to talk about the other weird things that happened. When I was 11, my mum had decided to go back to work, and since we had a dog, I was now responsible for going home at lunch to let her outside. I also walked my brother to school in the morning, and was responsible for locking the door, which I never forgot to do. My parents even gave me a custom print key and stuff, and lectured me constantly about it, so there's no way I would have forgotten to lock the door. On one particular day, I was walking up the street to my house, and suddenly felt very anxious as I approached the door. When I got to the step, I noticed the door was unlocked and open. It wasn't open all the way, but it was enough so that I could see into the house. I immediately went and got my neighbor, who agreed to come into the house with me. There was no one in the house, and nothing was out of place. This happened again when I was 12. On both occasions, I remember letting our dog out and rushing to get out of the house, as I felt like I wasn't welcome there at all. After reminding my dad of these events, he shared one with me from when I was only 4, and obviously have no memory of. I was asleep in the car at the time. Apparently, we were on our way back from a New Year's party. My parents did not drink and drive, so there was no alcohol involved here. And we were driving up our street, and my dad noticed their bedroom light turned on. Then, seconds later, it turned off again. When we got into the house, he left my mum in the car with my brother and I, and walked up to find the door unlocked and open. He grabbed a baseball bat and searched the house to find that no one was there. Now onto the slightly more creepy events. I am almost sure the unlocked doors/lights could be explained by non-paranormal activity. This part all started with my brother, who started to claim that on some nights, he would see a woman in a large white dress walk from the top of the stairs down to the bottom, and then disappear. Their stairs had a sort of balcony at the top, and curved down 180 degrees with 2 separate small landings. My brother told me about it first, and obviously I didn't believe him. Eventually he told my mum, and she sort of went along with it. Then one night, my mum claimed that she saw the woman in a white dress standing on the balcony. Now, she did not tell me or my brother this until we had moved out the house, probably because we would have freaked the hell out. I have a very vivid memory from one afternoon when I was in my brother's room, which looked out directly at the balcony, and I was playing in this Scooby-Doo tent we had gotten. I fell asleep in the tent, and later woke up and turned over to see a woman in a white dress and a man in a suit and top hat dancing together just outside the door. It was very peaceful, and I wasn't scared at all, even though I feel like I should have been. I looked away, and they were gone. Thinking back about this now, my encounter with the woman in the white dress may have been a dream. However, I still find it interesting that it happened. As a kid, I always struggled falling asleep, and often would end up tossing and turning in bed until fairly late at night. I remember one night feeling extremely restless. I don't remember what time it was, but I remember feeling an urge to close my bedroom door. I always left it open very slightly. My bed was nearly right beside the door, and I didn't have to get out to close it. I rolled over, leaned out of the bed slightly, and when I noticed a large shadowy figure standing just on the other side of the door, I froze instantly. I just stared out the door at it. I could not make out an exact shape, but it looked like a human. Eventually I started to call out, "Dad?" Thinking, but mostly hoping it was him, as I was extremely scared to see this outside my door. But the figure didn't move. I continued to call, still nothing. Eventually I closed the door and turned over in my bed to hide, as I was shaking with fear. My dad came in moments later after hearing me call for him and asked what was wrong. I explained, and he told me that he was sleeping the whole time, and so was my mum. Also, it was way too large to have been my brother, who's 2 years younger than me. This memory has been ingrained so well in me that I still get shivers and my eyes water when I remember it. There is a huge cemetery in a neighboring city that I loved to go visit prior to having kids. The Black Dahlia, among many others, are buried there. A few years ago, when my son was 3 and my daughter was 1, out of randomness one morning, I decided we would go to a cemetery to walk around and have a picnic. That specific one. I told my husband about my plan, packed up lunch, the mum bag, kids, and headed out the door. On our way there, my son asked me where we were going, and I told him we were going on a walk through a park and have a picnic. I did not tell him we were going to a cemetery. All the people that have passed are buried there. We get there and drive past the administrative building and main gigantic water fountain. Then we head up towards the top. But before getting there, I take a turn to head past some of the oldest graves. And as we round a bend, my son says to me, "Mummy, do you see all the people? Their hairs on my neck stand on end." As I ask my 3-year-old son, "Which people?" As you can imagine, there's not a single living soul outside my car in sight. And my son replies, "All the people on the hill waving at me." I look around and couldn't see a single person, and hadn't seen one since we entered the grounds. I told my son, "No, buddy, I can't see the people. But just because Mummy can't see them doesn't mean they might not be there. Let's go have our lunch somewhere else so we don't bother them." And basically noped out of there. Now I have no idea what my son may have been seeing, but just like I said to him, just because I can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. If he could actually see people waving at him, then I could not. I haven't the faintest if they were beckoning or waving at him with friendly or malicious intent. So yeah, screw that. I am, though, thoroughly creeped out. This cemetery was notorious for being really scary and supposedly haunted. After about an hour and a half of us pacing outside the entrance gates, no one had had enough nerve to go inside, so we decided to hightail it out of there, as we had already lingered too long and cops patrolled the area pretty frequently to keep kids out. It's the middle of the night, and we're on our way. My one buddy Jeff and I are bringing up the rear of our group, and suddenly we both stop dead in our tracks and point our flashlights to the left of us at the exact same time to the exact same tree. To me, it was like I saw a figure out of the corner of my eye, but almost instantaneously in my head. It's hard to describe. I knew it was there before I saw it, and when we lit the tree up it was gone. A white creature against the darkness, crouched behind and clutching the tree trunk. Dark eyes, really dark eyes. It was about 40 feet away. I was already scared shitless of the place, and we hadn't even gone in. I chalked it up to nerves and my mind playing tricks on me. But Jeff and I both described the exact same thing when our friends asked us what we saw. We get home later that night, and my other buddy does some digging on the internet about the cemetery, and pulls up an interview with a couple who described their experience exactly how Jeff and I did. No one had any prior knowledge to this creature before we went there, and somehow we came out seeing the same thing that a few other people had. It shook me up for a while, and still gets me to this day. While visiting England as a tourist, I ran across 2 tombstones for men named James Dixon, as that's my name. I was not looking for anyone named Dixon. I wasn't knowingly visiting places where any of my relatives had lived. This was pure coincidence. One of them was inside the town of Kirkby, Lonsdale, in Cumbria. I was staying there for a week because some relatives of mine had arranged a house swap. It happened that the shortest path between the house and the town centre involved a shortcut through the churchyard. Once I just looked up, and it was there. The same week we went on a bus trip to the Lake District, which was a short distance away. In one of the villages we passed through, I believe Grasmere, I ran across the other one. It happened that this James Dixon had been a servant of the poet William Wordsworth. The inscription on the tomb said that it had been paid for by the Wordsworth family. It was in the same cemetery as Wordsworth's own grave. I don't regard these as particularly creepy, but it was an amazing coincidence. My experience happened at a cemetery just outside the town of Lafayette. But before I tell you what I experienced, I'd like to give you a bit of history. I'd have to check facts, but I believe a couple of years before Oregon became a state, a woman's son was accused of witchcraft. Quite possibly a legitimate accusation, but who knows. Her son was killed under the accusation, and she was obviously very upset about it. So she reacted accordingly and was sentenced to die herself. I can't remember if she was accused of the same charges, but nonetheless, she was sentenced to die. Just before they executed her, I want to say they burned her at the stake, she cursed the town of Lafayette, saying the town would burn completely down 3 times before the curse would be lifted. And since then, believe it or not, it has burnt down completely, twice. And legend goes that she haunts the Lafayette cemetery and will chase out and leave scratches on the back of disrespectful people that go there at dusk and at night who challenge her existence. So this is my experience. Me and some of my buddies were bored high school students on a Friday night and decided that we wanted to go ghost hunting. We were going to go to an abandoned insane asylum, but we heard some of our friends got arrested for trespassing there just the week prior. So we decided to not go there. I went online looking for haunted places nearby. I'm from Dundee, so I got online and looked around for the story of the Lafayette Cemetery. I told my buddies the story. Hesitant to the idea, they agreed that we should go check it out for ourselves. I've always believed that I was a bit more sensitive to the paranormal and could pick up on energies around me. I'm very good at reading people, whether they're good people or not. So, anyway, we get there at around 11:45. The cemetery is surrounded by farmland on all sides, but the land is very flat. The cemetery is on a hill, the only hill for some miles actually, and has the only thicket of trees for some miles. We parked off the road and got our flashlights and started to walk past the gate, up to the winding road that goes up to the top of the hill where the cemetery is. As soon as I passed the gate, I felt like I was being watched intently, like someone was staring me the hell down. As soon as I felt the stare, I instantly stopped in my tracks and thought to myself, oh my god, she's here and she knows we're here. My friends didn't believe in ghosts, so needless to say they didn't notice anything odd, and with 50 yards in front of me walking up the hill, while I stood there by myself, dumbfounded. I don't know why, but I knew this energy or spirit was a very, very angry female, and something in me knew it was the lady I had read about. I remember thinking to myself, and simultaneously telepathically speaking out to her, I'm not here with bad intentions, and I'm strictly here out of curiosity and to pay my respects. I promise I'm not here in any disrespect. I kept saying those words in my mind to her over and over, almost like a prayer, and I felt the gaze coming out of the thicket of blackberry bushes and other vegetation off the side of the path going uphill, like I could pinpoint where the energy was. So after I said my prayer a few more times, I walked further, trying to catch up with my friends, and when I took 10 steps forward, I felt this energy bum rush me. It was about 30 yards away from me, looking at me from the forest in 1 second, and the next it was right up in my face, and I started to panic because I couldn't see anything. It was a very bizarre feeling, when you can't see something but you know that it's there. The feeling was amazing, for lack of a better word, but what was weird was that I felt the energy move in its path towards me. I could sense the path, but anyway, it was right up in my face now, and I repeated my prayer. I felt it circle me slowly. I knew she was judging me. I could tell she was deciding for herself if I was full of shit or not. Thankfully I wasn't, and she knew that, because while I had felt her menacing, angry, sad, judgmental gaze circle me one more time, the feeling of her presence slowly dissipated, and I never felt or sensed anything for the rest of that night, nor the next 2 times I went there trying to sense her again. I swear on everything that this is true. Believe it or not, I don't care. This truly happened to me, and it was incredible. I'm so glad I was able to experience that on that night, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. This took place a few months ago, in mid-November. It was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. My girlfriend-to-be and another couple she was friends with at the time and I were all hanging out. Being teenagers who enjoy trying our luck, all 4 of us decided to take a trip to Riverside Cemetery on the north side of town. Now, I've been to this cemetery searching for stuff myself before, and I had never had much more than the occasional expected sign of spirits being nearby, such as white spots or orbs in photographs, or the occasional time where my camera would suddenly say low battery whilst powering down, even though I always made sure to change the batteries before we came and reduce shutter speed. So naturally, I thought nothing more likely would happen this time. However, such was definitely not the case. I could tell the second that we arrived at the cemetery that something was different. There was something about the way the air felt. The atmosphere was entirely different than usual. It was so much more energetic than normal. The 4 of us got out of the car because the other 3 wanted to look around a little bit. I wasn't too keen on this idea at first, but I decided I didn't want to look weak in front of the girl I liked. So we got out. I brought something I used for communication called dowsing rods. They're pretty cool. They're held horizontally, and spirits can move them based on questions you ask. They're pretty cool if you're a paranormal enthusiast. Well, we get out of the car, and we begin to use the dowsing rods. I start asking some questions, and then the girl I liked asks to use them, so I hand them over to her. She asks a few questions before the guy in the couple she invited asks to use them too. I say fine. He asks some more questions, and like the past 2 of us, the questions are answered, but nothing too extreme happens. At this point, the girl in the couple invited, Emily, is the only person who hasn't used the rods yet and didn't want to, but the rest of us pressure her into doing so. When she asked her questions though, the rods quickly whipped around to answer rather than slowly like for the three of us. So I take the rods back and ask the spirit if it liked her, to which the answer was yes. Then, because I'm starting to get suspicious, I ask if it's a benevolent spirit, to which it answers no. I freak out quickly, close the session and put the rods away. Emily is beginning to freak out, and so I have to comfort her. Meanwhile, the other two wander off in the headstones because they want to do some headstone rubbing. I'm starting to really feel the hairs on my neck prick up, and it's making me quite anxious, which is when I begin to see things. Out of the corner of my eyes, I see black figures fitting in between the headstones, and this is really making me nervous. Mind you, the other two were on the other side of the cemetery at this point, and I had a clear line of vision of them, so it couldn't have been them. I tell Emily, and she and I quickly run to catch up with the others, having decided that splitting up is no longer a good idea. This is where things get really freaky. After a few moments of being out in the headstones, I hear something. It's so difficult to describe, yet it fills me with fear every time I have to describe it. It was a loud scream off in the distance, and it could have been a person's scream, despite the fact it was so animalistic, full of fury and rage, and sounded so inhuman from the rasp. But the tenor of the scream and the pure fury that sounded like a soul being dragged directly to hell. Not to mention that it came from the woods adjacent to the cemetery. I give the others a look, who look back at me with the exact same expression of pure terror on their faces, and we begin sprinting straight to the car. We begin to take Emily to her house. We turn on the GPS and follow the directions. However, it wasn't before long before Emily pipes up from the back seat, saying, "This isn't how you get to my house." So we begin looking down at a step-by-step directional, and she's scrolling down and the list keeps going. After 30 seconds, the directions were coming. Her house is only 3/4 of a mile from the cemetery, so there's no way the directions are accurate. We follow the directions, and for a few moments, we realize that they're taking us further from her house. We think maybe this isn't the best idea, and have her tell us how to get to her house from memory. We get there, drop her off, and try to use the GPS to get to my house, but it was the same thing. It was giving us endless weird directions, and we had to turn it off. That scream still haunts me. I wish I could impress upon all of you how tortured and demonic and utterly inhuman the scream was. Furthermore, Emily would later tell us that night, after we dropped her off at her house, one of her favorite plants was thrown off her dresser and smashed to the floor. I was walking through a cemetery one day with some friends. Being teenagers, we were naturally curious and adventurous, so this is something we did often. As far as we could see, it looked like someone was praying next to a grave, but they kept looking up and around. Being about 100 yards away, it was hard to make anything else out, but they were wearing white clothes. They were a bit blurred, but I could tell the head was moving. I asked my friend next to me if she saw the same thing, and affirmed what I was seeing. At first I said it was a ghost, but she denied it because it was a solid person, still too far away to say anything more. As we continued to walk, I kept my eyes on where they were, since I was the only one skeptical to know more. As we got closer, I lost direct sight of what I was looking at because of the other tombstones blocked my line of sight. Once we got to where the person who appeared to be praying and looking around, they were gone. There was literally no one else in this cemetery because it was around sunset and getting nighttime. We would have seen them walk away unless they purposefully hid themselves very well from us, but I guess I'll never know. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's cemetery stories. I haven't been to one in a while, you know. Maybe I should go back to one. Anyway, if you enjoyed tonight's video, please do not forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. If you're new here, there should be new content on the channel every night. Fresh stories for your listening pleasure. So feel free to subscribe and press the bell icon for good measure to not miss your nightly spooks. If there's a story that you would like to share that perhaps happened to you, you can find the information in the description, and hopefully we'll have it seen on the channel soon enough. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.